Recently I've been receiving quite a few requests from people asking if I'd mind going through my neck construction, which I'm happy to do. I guess most makers have their own way of going about this, but we're going to go through the way I do it. Firstly, the neck itself. This is cedar. It's called Calantis from the Philippines. It's actually been a banned export from the Philippines for about a quarter of a century, so it's good and old. The first thing we need to make sure is the grain. I don't know if we can see this, but the grain needs to be well quarter sawn, so the grain itself is standing upright like so. So that's necessary. And so we'll get into it. And the first thing we want to know is the grain direction of the neck. In this instance I've put an arrow on it, as you can see, pointing that the grain goes in this direction. To find that, you simply need to plane it. If you're going in the wrong direction, it will tend to tear. If you're going in the right direction, it won't. And when you do that, you want to make sure it's reasonably flat. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect at this stage, but reasonably flat. This is the top side where the fretboard's going to sit. So we don't want lumps and bumps in it at this stage. It'll only have to be taken out later. So, the first job, I suppose, is the head. We need to cut the head off and join it on the back of the neck. This is called a scarf joint, and so I'll just pop it in the vise for now, like so. And this is where the measurements I'm going to get you get a little bit confusing, because it does depend on the length of the head you want to have on your guitar, so you need to know a few measurements yourself before we go too far with this. My head's about 175 millimeters long from nut to the tip of the head. Therefore, I'm going to cut the scarf joint off at about 220 millimeters, which will give me tons of wood. I won't need to worry about the length. So, okay, so I'm going to mark the neck here at around about 220 millimeters. I'll square a line across, like so. And now we're going to turn the neck on its side in order to achieve the correct angle. So we'll mark that point there on the side of the neck. Now the angle of the head is indeed debatable. You don't want to make it too straight, and you don't want to pitch it back too far. In actual fact, the average head's going to fall somewhere in the region of 14 to 15 degrees. Whether you use that measurement or those degrees or not is entirely up to how you want your head to look. But I like it at 14 degrees, so if we put a mark there on 14, we take our ruler like so and scribe it across like there. That is the angle of our cut for our head, which will give us approximately 14 degrees. So now we have the angle of our neck. All we need to do is to cut it off. We can use a tenon saw for that if we like. If you do, make sure you're going nice and straight and not at an angle. I have a bandsaw which is considerably quicker, and that's what we're going to use just to chop it off. We've made our cut, so there it is. Now the scarf is taken from the top and placed underneath like so to give us our neck angle, like that. First thing we've got to do, because this has been rough sawn, is to clean this edge so that it's nice and straight and square. Otherwise, you know, we don't want the head sitting at an angle like this, because it will obviously be very unsightly. So the way to go about that, and we have to be very careful of this sharp edge here, because eventually it's going to show up on the back here, and this is where the back of our head's going to be shaped, so the join needs to be very good. If we just try to plane and scrape this now, we're going to chip this edge. The way to avoid it is to put it on the top of the head like so, and plane it like that, straight down. So that's what we're going to do. I'll just pop it in the vise, like so, and that's how we're going to do it. Okay, so what we've got to do now is to plane this surface. We're not so worried about this part of the head. We'll talk about that later on. But at the moment we're just trying to get the back of the head here nice and flat and straight. So you need to set your plane up. So it's nice and sharp. And have it set reasonably lightly. Okay, so we'll have a look at that just to see what we've done. Now that cramp, by the way, is to stop it slipping like so. So if we have our square, like so, you can't see, I'm sure, but I can tell whether it's square or not. So the head's not quite flat and square. Rather than use the plane, we're using the scraper. Again, it's very finely set. We don't want to be ripping too much off in one go. So I'm just going to check to make sure it's flat. And just a touch. There, so we mark it, just so as we know exactly where we're meant to be taking it off. We'll just hold that down. Bit of a lump there. We'll take that out. You need to take a bit of time to make sure this is nice and flat and square, because the glue joint of the head will depend upon it. A little bit of a height there, we'll just take that off and it should be done like so. Check it one more time, and that's very good. Okay, so that's got the face of the scarf nice and flat and basically ready to be stuck, except at the moment the head is too thick. At this stage it's measuring 24 millimeters. Now we want to take that down closer to 20 millimeters, which in fact is still too thick. The thickness of your head is really something that the individual maker can decide for themselves. However, it should be somewhere in a minimum of around 21 millimeters thick. We're going to cut this to 20 at this stage, which means it's still too thick because we have to put our head veneers on top of it, which will come at a slightly later date, and we'll talk about that then. But for the time being, we want to make this about 20 mil thick, which means then it will be ready to be put on. So again, we'll just go to the bandsaw. You can plane it off if you like. It's a lot quicker to chew it off on the bandsaw. So we'll put the fence on there so as we've got something to run along. And we'll set this so as it cuts somewhere in the region of 20 millimeters thick. Now we want to take the 20 millimeters off what will be the face side, not the back side. So we're going to cut it like so. There we go, and we'll dispose of that piece. Okay, so having achieved that, we've now got a head that's approximately 20 millimeters thick, and that can be now put aside. It is, as we've already said, going to be stuck on the underside of the neck like so, to give us our neck angle. But for the time being, that can be put aside. One thing we have to do is to support the neck. Generally, one would place in there 2 strips of ebony. I prefer to use jarrah, which is an Australian timber. This came out of a house that was demolished, that was originally built in 1890, so it's good and old and nice and dry. And basically we're going to put 2 strips of jarrah or ebony or any wood, hardwood that you like to use, down the centre of the neck like so. The piece that goes in should be approximately 6 millimeters thick, and it should go down approximately 12 millimeters deep. Now the first thing we're going to need is a centre line up the middle of the head. Okay, so we need to find our centre line, so we need to measure the neck. In this case it's 80 millimeters wide, which is about standard for a neck, and we'll mark 80 millimeters up here, which it is, and we'll mark our 40 millimeters there. So we want a centre line just down the middle there. One thing I don't think I mentioned at the start of this, which is relevant, is we spoke about the grain direction of the neck. On the top of the neck, where that arrow is, we want the grain facing the body of the guitar. If that's the case, the underside of the neck will be facing the head, which will make life considerably easier for us when we're shaping the neck. Rather than running our spoke shape into the heel and the body, we'll be drawing it towards the head, which is a lot easier. That's really the only reason. As to these strips, they want to be approximately 6 millimeters apart, so that's 3 millimeters each side of our centre line. So if we draw our 3 millimeter mark there, and here, and here, and we can draw our lines down like so. These doesn't have to be perfectly 3 millimeters each side of the centre line, but you don't want to go too far, because as we're going 12 millimeters deep, the further away from the centre line we get, the more likely we are when we shape the back of the neck to cut through and see them, and we don't want that to happen. That would be a disaster. So there we go. So all we're going to do really is to route the 2 trenches out 6 millimeters wide. I've prepared these, and approximately 12 millimeters deep. So in order to do our strips, we need to route our slots, as I've said. And I have a simple jig here that goes into the vise, and this is just to hold it, the neck, like so, allowing me to run it across this edge. Check that this edge is reasonably straight, or that edge if that's the edge you're going to use, so as the router is not going in and out, so we need to do that. So I just need to get the router, which is over here. Now this is a trimmer. It's not a big industrial routing machine, it's simply a trimmer. So we've got to be careful of how deep we go. Even if you've got a big industrial router, you need to be very careful how deep you make your cuts, because if we try to go down 12 millimeters, the router will probably jump and score the wood in all sorts of places where we don't want it to occur. So I'll just plug this in. So simple enough, because these measurements of 3 mil each side of the centre line aren't super duper critical, all we have to do is to have a look where the point of our router bit is going to sit, which is approximately there. Do it up like so. Now we're going to run the router right the way along, but we're going to stop where the scarf join starts here, and there'll be a reason that we'll go into later about that. We're not going to do it on this particular instance, but nevertheless that's where we want to stop it. It doesn't matter if it goes a little bit further, but we don't want to go right through. So I'll turn this on. It's going to make a bit of a noise. So I've made my initial cut approximately 3 to 3.5 millimeters deep, and I'm going to continue to go down at that sort of depth until I've reached 12 millimeters. I'm better off taking off a little bit at a time than trying to rush the thing and take off too much and find the router bouncing around all over the place. So we'll just do one more cut. We'll check with the depth of the vernier, and we find it's 8 millimeters, so I've gone in more like 4 millimeters with each cut. That's fine. Again, we measure the depth of our cut, and we're 11 millimeters now. And we want to go in about 12, so we want to go down about 1 more millimeter. We don't want to go too much deeper than that, because, as we said before, we don't want any unpleasant surprises when we come to shape the underside of the neck. At 12 millimeters, you will not go right through when you shape the neck, particularly if we're 3 millimeters each side of the center line. So just one more cut. And we'll measure it one more time, and we'll find that it's about 12 millimeters. So that'll do us for the depth. Point number one now is, can we get this to go in there? This is 6 millimeters wide. The trench is meant to be 6 millimeters wide. So there we go. It fits nice and tightly, and that's the way it should fit. If you turn it upside down and it falls out, it's too loose. If you have to bash it in with a sledgehammer, it's too tight, because what will happen is, as the neck's quarter sawn, you will split the neck. We're putting it in at this thickness of the neck, which is far too thick to avoid anything like that happening. So that's pretty well ready to go in. All we're going to do now is cut the other side. So we simply reset the router, we take it back up to about 3 millimeters of depth, thereabouts, without being too fussy about it, and we reset the point against the other line, which is about there, I think. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so we're going to one more cut. have a quick measure and we're down 10 millimeters. So we want to go further too. So we'll set that. Like so, and our final cut should give us our depth. .2 millimeters, just as right. So, there are slots done. Our next problem is to make sure these fit. Well, one fitted that side, this one will fit this side. It's a little bit tight, so I might just loosen that up a little bit, and then we'll just stick it in. Okay, so now we're going to do, we've done our trenches, we've got our centre strips, we just need to stick them in. Going to use Titebond for this job. Usually I would use hide glue for everything, but for the ease of doing the video, Titebond will work very well. Now you don't want to put a flood of glue inside these things. All you want to do is to run a little bit down each side, much like that. If you can see, I have a little stick here which will do to spread it out down the side of our neck, like so. Like so. Do the same down the other side. Again, we do not want a flood of glue, because when we put our centre strip in, if it's a nice tight fit, which of course it should be, we'll squeeze all the glue to the bottom of the trench, and we'll have like a hydraulic effect on it. So the slip goes in and we push it well down. Now, to make sure it's well seated, I simply put it in the vise and do the vise up like so, just to make sure that it's pushed well to the bottom of our trench, like so. We don't get a lot of glue squeeze out because there's not a lot of glue in there. We can wipe off the excess we've got. Now we'll just put the other side in. So again, just a little bit down each side is plenty. It certainly can't fall out once the fretboard's stuck on it. It doesn't want to be loose. So again, there's a strip. As I say, hide glue works brilliantly for all jobs on a guitar. So for this exercise, it's probably easier just to grab the Titebond. So this one goes in, much the same as the last one. Again, you put it in the vise just to make sure it's well seated, like so, like so. Good. Now you might have noticed, I'll just get a bit of tissue to wipe the excess glue off with, like so. Not that it really matters, it's all got to be scraped down once this is dry. The strips I made were probably about closer to 14 millimeters high instead of 12. Gives me something to clean off. You know, you might notice that the strips are not long enough. This is going to be a dovetail neck construction, not done in the Spanish heel method. If it was the Spanish heel, probably it would pay you to run these strips right to the end of the neck. In this instance it's a dovetail, and that's amply far enough. So that's it so far. All we can do now is wait a little while for the glue to dry, and then we're going to thin the neck down because it's way too thick at the moment prior to sticking our scarf joint on. So we'll have to come back in a couple of hours or so just to get to that stage.